Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. I'm Robert Parsons, and my guest today is one of the most successful film directors that Israel has produced. Amos Gitai is in France, where he now spends much of his life, for the launch this April of his latest film, A Tramway in Jerusalem. A controversial figure within his own country who doesn't shy away from addressing the open wounds of Israeli society, his latest film takes place almost entirely within a tram as it crosses from one end of Jerusalem to the other, a metaphor for Israel itself. Amos Gitai, thanks very much for joining us on France 24. I'd like, if I may, to start with your new film, A Tramway in Jerusalem, and ask you, what was the idea behind the film?
I mean, I tried to put in this sardine box, which is a tramway, you know. We have tramways all over the world, or metro, where people meet. I mean, it's not a choice, but they're just next to each other in a means of transportation. And this is a kind of, like you said, a kind of a microcosmos of the relations between, there are 36 actresses and actors, Israeli, Palestinians, French, Italian, German.
7 languages as well.
Yeah, polyphony of languages. So we have the kind of music of different languages. So this is really Jerusalem. Jerusalem is not some sort of utopian peaceful dream. Even sometimes inside churches you have conflicts. But I would like to simulate what can be a relationship in a tramway or in my tramway.
I said a metaphor for Israel, but perhaps it's more, as you just suggested, a metaphor for Jerusalem rather than Israel.
I mean, you can take it anywhere you want. You can even take it beyond Israel because it's really about people who are deracinated, which is basically the story of humanity. All humanity, I suppose you speaking English in Paris and me speaking my original language, Hebrew, in Paris.
Makes the point.
Makes the point. So all humanity is being unrooted, you know, by wars, by refugee, by economic reasons, by metropole. So this is the material that we filmmakers have to deal with when we put this kind of juxtaposition of stories in one tramway.
Yeah, I mean, the tramway, it comes across, you know, it's claustrophobic, it's tense, it's humorous, it's everything really, in a way, antagonistic. It really sort of sums up, at least Jerusalem's society.
Yeah, I mean, Jerusalem is a great archaeological site of humanity, like you say. I mean, this very small city, 1 square kilometer, if a city can speak, it would tell you that it had managed to indoctrinate 2/3 of the planet by the 3 big monotheistic religions which radiate through it. But more than showing just mosques and synagogues and the Wailing Wall, it's really showing the faces of these different characters and their stories. And we see actually the skin of the face of the figures is really the mirror of Jerusalem.
You know, in a strange way, I sort of find it slightly optimistic, because we all know about the antagonisms within Israeli society, but here you have this enclosed space where everything actually works in a strange sort of way. People don't, although there are incidents where there are clashes in the tram, but nevertheless, you know, it runs on time, people get along sort of. It's not really a particularly pessimistic view of Israel, if it's a metaphor.
I mean, I don't know if it's pessimistic or optimistic, because when you asked me before we went to the studio, what is my reading of the last election? It's not the most optimistic reading, but we have to keep hope. And this is really a project of hope, meaning that what will eventually create the human relations which can prepare peace is the daily life, what the French call the quotidien. Is that people will sit next to each other in my tramway, in this tramway in Jerusalem. A woman would speak to ultra-Orthodox Jew, which is not something that happens. Israelis will sit next to Palestinians. There will also be moments of dispute, like in every society. There are also in the metro, I suppose, in Britain or in New York. But there is no war. And the issue is really how to create this tissue of relationship, like in my native city, Haifa, when people live next to each other without big dramas, without being too indoctrinated into hate, into incitement. And so it is, you are right in that sense, it's a film of hope.
Yeah, I find that interesting. In other words, you're sort of looking at it as a society that can work. But I wonder, you know, looking at Israel and the premise of the state as a state that was created on the basis of the expulsion of another people, whether ultimately it can work.
I mean, if we look at Europe, since, just 70 or 75 years ago, all this beautiful continent of the greatest thinkers and the greatest musicians, and Goethe and Karl Marx and Beethoven and so on, was devastated by tens of millions of death. Probably the worst, the two world wars, the worst massacres in the story of humanity.
I suppose occupation is the key issue.
And still Europe, in spite of Brexit, okay, but you can take a train from one country, go to another one. So you won't believe that 75 years ago it was a kind of a death. So the Middle East, with all the atrocities in relation to Europe, is relatively modest. And let's hope it will stay this way. The question is when. How long would it take to the rivalry parties to get to the conclusion that they can disagree, that they have to allow each other to have self-determination, the Israelis have to facilitate the Palestinian self-determination, and they can live next to each other and be creative. How long would that take? That's a question, and obviously we don't have the answer.
I know you're very critical in many ways of Israeli society, but what do you see as the strengths of Israeli society?
I'm critical of the Israeli politicians who took power. I think that in Israel you have very convincing figures in culture, in literature, in science, in technology, and so on. Great achievements. I'm critical of politicians who, in order to get re-elected, incite one group against another, and apparently it works. By the way, it works not just in Israel. It works. You can look at East Europe. You can look at America. You can look at many models where this kind of system of using these kind of cameras, which look at me, I don't know exactly where it is, but inciting against each other using what is called, in a fake way, social network, although it's not so social because it's quite centralized. So inciting against each other to be re-elected, to have more power, to discriminate, and so on. So this is a sad story. And obviously, the place of cinema or culture or literature is on the soul of the people. Culture don't have real power. It's only symbolic power. So we are there to register a memory with the hope that the memory of something else will make its way and at some point will reappear and will create another reality.
Which will take time.
It takes time. It's not immediate. I'm not for a kind of a Michael Moore cinema that you want to feed yourself by force. I'm for making people think, interpret, reanalyze, and obviously that takes time. But let's take a far example. Let's take even a painter like Picasso, who, when he was shocked by the bombardment of Guernica, the Basque village by the fascists and the Nazis, by the Luftwaffe, he made a painting. Okay, the Picasso, his medium was painting, was not cinema. And this painting registered a memory of this bombardment by the Luftwaffe. And then, so it doesn't have an immediate impact. Picasso was smart enough to use the sanction of the artist, which is also an important thing. He didn't allow the painting to travel back to Spain as long as Franco is alive. After Franco's death, now the Guernica is well placed in the Reina Sofia in Madrid. But just last year, by strange coincidence, the Spanish prime minister decided to take out Franco from his kitsch mausoleum, to take him out. And you can ask yourself why. There is no real political thing. It's just the power of memory. Okay. So sometimes we have to keep traces.
But to take you away from that and to the now of Israel, we've just had another election, which Benjamin Netanyahu has won for a fifth time. What is it? What is the chord that he strikes in Israeli society that enables him to keep going in this way?
I think that probably the opposition was not structured enough. He's obviously a talented politician who knows to manipulate the public opinion in his own way. Unfortunately, I think it creates harm in long term to the Israeli society, to the Palestinian society. It intoxicates future relationship which should exist beyond him. So I think that's not a very happy news. And we are not, people that I know are not happy. They were actually felt that it was not a good day. You know.
And Netanyahu and his government were also responsible for the nationality law that was introduced last year, making Israel the home of the Jewish people, the nation state of the Jewish people exclusively. With somebody with your views, how do you relate to that? And where does that leave the efforts of people like you who are trying to bring Israeli society together, Arabs and Jews?
As I said, I think we should keep speaking about hope because, let's make it clear. I think that people who have similar opinion like me love the country. We're not in agreement with the people who run it, but we have a relationship to both to the land, to the climate, to things which compose the personality of each person. But we are in disagreement with the way that it takes. And sometimes you're on the losing side, but we should not lose hope. It's not a question of optimism or pessimism. Hope is a motor of change, and ideas also change the planet, not just machine guns and money. So we have to speak about ideas and hope to reconcile this conflict.
And on that optimistic note, Amos Gitai, we have to end it. Thanks very much for being on the interview. Thanks to you too, the viewers, for being with us. But don't go away. More news and headlines to follow.